I always thought urban exploration was a thrill, a way to feel alive by stepping where others feared to tread. But as I stood outside the frozen facade of the Delacroix Grand Hotel, snow swirling under a sky blacker than midnight, I felt something I'd never admit to my friends, a growing certainty we shouldn't be here. The hotel loomed with skeletal windows like 100 dark eyes, ice crusted on its marble lions guarding the front steps. The place looked like it had been ripped out of time, left to rot in the eternal winter of these northern woods. Our boots crunched on the snow as we crossed the parking lot littered with half-buried cars, some so old they had rotary dials instead of key fobs, and I wondered how many guests had checked in decades ago and never left. The doors were chained shut, but Jackson, the fearless one, snipped them with bolt cutters he'd slung across his back like a trophy. The clatter of the chain hitting the floor echoed into the darkness beyond, a sound so loud it felt like it must have woken something deep inside. We stepped through into the grand lobby, flashlights sweeping across a cathedral of decayed opulence, a sweeping staircase with a red carpet so moth-eaten it looked like dried blood, chandeliers sagging from the ceiling like insect husks, and to the right, the once elegant reception desk, now splintered and crawling with ice. But it was the smell that made me gag. A cold, moldy stench mixed with something sweetly rotten, like old meat left in a freezer that had stopped working years ago. We paused at the edge of the lobby, each of us struck silent by the sight at the far end. Tall, double doors, carved with ornate skull motifs, slightly ajar. Beyond them, flickering light spilled out like a dying heartbeat. "That's the ballroom," whispered Tanya, clutching my arm. "That's where they found them." Her voice quivered, but she wouldn't look away. We all knew the legend. In 1979, during a freak blizzard, the hotel hosted a private gala. When rescuers finally reached it days later, they found every guest dead, heads bashed in or throats slit, and in the center of the ballroom stood a circle of glass skulls that hadn't been there before. The deaths were blamed on a mass hysteria event, but locals said something else caused it, something that still lingered. We pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The ballroom was vast and hollow, its marble floor cracked like ice on a lake. Dozens of candles burned low on a grand piano, flames dancing in the icy drafts. But it was what surrounded the piano that made my blood run cold. Rows upon rows of glass skulls arranged like an audience, each one lifelike and unique. Their features were so distinct, I felt like I could recognize them from old photos, their empty, crystal eyes reflecting the candlelight with a cold fire. I shivered, feeling like I'd stepped into a nightmare church where the congregation was made of the dead. As I moved between the skulls, I realized they weren't quite clear. Subtle distortions shimmered in their depths like smoke or rippling water, and in the heart of each skull, a tiny light flickered with the same rhythm as the candles. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the reflections. Then I saw it. One skull's mouth moved. Just a twitch, so quick I almost doubted it. But then another, 2 rows back, turned an imperceptible fraction toward me. I froze. The air seemed to thicken, the silence pressing in like an ocean. "Did you see that?" I hissed. But the others were transfixed by the central piano. Jackson reached it first, wiping dust from a journal resting on the keys. The book was bound in worn red leather, its spine cracked like old bones. He flipped it open, revealing pages filled with cramped, frantic handwriting. The skulls watch, they remember. Each skull is a death-given form. When you see yourself inside, it begins. Tanya whimpered. I looked up, and for the briefest instant, I thought I saw my own face reflected in every single skull, mouths opening in a silent scream. Then the candlelight flickered violently, plunging half the room into darkness. Our flashlights jittered as the batteries drained all at once, beams stuttering before dying entirely. Shadows closed in, the only light now the guttering candles. Something scuttled across the ceiling above us, a dry, clicking sound that echoed like bones rolling across marble. We gathered together near the piano, breathing hard. The shadows between the skulls seemed to shift and breathe, expanding in slow pulses. Every time I blinked, the skulls looked closer, their glass features now twisted into rictus grins. Jackson shoved the journal into his backpack. "We have to go, now." But as we turned, we saw the ballroom doors had vanished. Where they'd been stood only a solid wall of rotted wood, as if the hotel itself had closed its mouth around us. "Look!" Tanya screamed, pointing at one skull in the front row. Its eyes were now filled with swirling black fog, and as we watched, it projected a faint, flickering vision onto the cracked marble, a ghostly image of Jackson, alone, sprinting through the hotel corridors while an indistinct, shifting shape followed just out of sight. I couldn't look away. The vision ended with Jackson stumbling into the ballroom, into this exact spot, before being pulled backward by something unseen, his head smashing against the piano with a sickening crack. The projection faded, and Jackson let out a strangled gasp. He backed away, eyes wide, whispering, "No, that wasn't real. That was just... it can't be real." A cold wind swept through the ballroom, extinguishing the candles one by one, until only a single flame remained. Each time one died, the skull closest to it seemed to move, tilting imperceptibly toward us. I felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I reached for Tanya's hand, but she pulled away, staring at something over my shoulder with glassy eyes. I spun around, and nearly fell to my knees. There, just beyond the piano, stood an old woman in a tattered black veil, a burlap satchel slung over one shoulder. She moved like she floated, gliding silently between the skulls, her fingers brushing their cold surfaces like she was checking their quality. The veiled woman from the garage sale stories, the one who sold cursed objects. She looked up, though I couldn't see her eyes through the veil, and her voice rasped out like dry leaves. "They're not for sale, yet." She turned and melted into the darkness, as if the shadows had swallowed her whole. A door slammed somewhere deep in the hotel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Jackson broke first, sprinting between the skulls toward where he thought the exit might be. Tanya and I chased him, our footsteps booming across the marble. The skull's reflections twisted and writhed in the candlelight, distorting into horrific caricatures of ourselves, mouths gaping wider with each step. The corridors beyond the ballroom were worse than I imagined. Wallpaper peeled in strips like rotting skin, black mold spread across the ceilings like cancer, and doors lined the hallways with numbers that changed every time I blinked. We ran down one hall only to find ourselves back in the ballroom, the skulls waiting like patient predators. The last candle finally flickered out, plunging us into total darkness. A sound like wet breathing filled the space, followed by soft, deliberate footsteps circling us. I raised my flashlight, smacking it against my palm until it flared back to life. The beam caught dozens of skulls inches from our faces, their features twisted into nightmarish snarls. In the faint light, I saw Tanya's eyes rolling back in her head, her mouth moving soundlessly. Then she crumpled to the floor. Jackson grabbed her under the arms, screaming at me to help, but as we dragged her, I realized the floor beneath us had changed. No longer marble, but a slick, black stone that felt almost wet. Our footsteps slapped against the wet stone as we dragged Tanya's limp body, every movement echoing like thunder through the endless darkness. The walls on either side glistened with a sheen that caught the dying beam of my flashlight, revealing strange, shifting shapes beneath the surface, as if the hotel's walls were no longer wood and plaster, but some translucent membrane pulsing with black veins. Jackson's breath came in ragged gasps. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, his face pale as frost. "It's not real," he kept muttering. "It's not real." But his words sounded hollow, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. A cold wind howled through the hall, carrying with it the distant sound of glass chiming together. I glanced over my shoulder and froze. The skulls were following us, floating inches above the ground in a procession that snaked down the corridor, candlelight flaring within each hollow skull, as if they were lanterns carried by invisible hands. One by one, the skulls began to hum, a low, resonant vibration that rattled my teeth and made my bones feel brittle. Jackson slipped, nearly dropping Tanya, but I caught her just in time. We pressed on, turning a corner and bursting into a massive dining room that had collapsed in on itself. The ceiling caved in to reveal a night sky choked with swirling snow. The snow fell in unnatural patterns, spiraling in tight circles above the room before sifting down in slow motion. I looked up through the gaping hole and realized with a sick lurch that the stars were wrong. Constellations I'd memorized since childhood were missing, replaced by cold, alien arrangements that shifted like blinking eyes. In the center of the room stood a massive chandelier, somehow still suspended by a single, rusted chain. From its arms hung dozens of glass skulls, each one swaying gently, tapping together with that same eerie chime. Jackson set Tanya down and wiped the sweat from his face with a trembling hand. "We need to hide," he whispered. "They're coming." He motioned toward a side door, half hidden behind a collapsed buffet table. Together, we pulled Tanya's limp form across broken chairs and overturned silverware until we reached the door. I threw it open, expecting another rotting hallway, but what I saw made me stagger back. It was the ballroom again. Candles had relit themselves, casting the skulls in that same flickering glow. The piano sat exactly as we'd left it, the journal still resting on the keys. But this time, there was something new. The skulls were arranged in a perfect circle around the piano, each one facing inward, and in the center stood a figure cloaked in shadows. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but when they did, I realized with a jolt that the figure was me, or something that looked exactly like me. It was impossible, but there I stood, back turned, head tilted down as if studying the journal. Then, the doppelganger's head snapped up, and even from across the ballroom, I could feel its eyes lock onto mine. A hideous smile spread across its face, glassy and inhuman, as if its skin were stretched too tightly over a crystal skull. It stepped forward, and every skull in the room shifted to follow it, the soft hum growing louder until it felt like the entire hotel was vibrating. Jackson screamed and slammed the door shut, yanking me back as the hum rose to a deafening crescendo. The walls around us flexed and bulged outward, black veins pulsating faster, droplets of some viscous, dark liquid oozing from cracks in the ceiling. I fumbled with the flashlight, casting its beam wildly through the dining room until it caught on a service elevator across the room. "There!" I shouted, dragging Tanya's unresponsive body toward it. Jackson threw himself at the elevator doors, prying them open with a crowbar he'd pulled from his backpack. The doors screeched apart, revealing a shaft descending into utter darkness. The air that wafted up smelled of damp earth and something sharp, like burnt hair. We didn't have a choice. Jackson climbed onto the cables, straddling them while I helped lower Tanya onto his back. I followed, the flashlight clenched between my teeth, the beam cutting across rusted walls slick with moisture. We descended slowly, the cables groaning under our weight. Above us, the skull's hum had become a chorus of whispers, dozens of overlapping voices chanting words I couldn't understand. Then came the scraping, claws on metal, as something started climbing down the walls after us, moving impossibly fast. We reached the bottom with a bone-jarring thud, landing in knee-deep water that sent icy shockwaves through my legs. The basement stretched out before us, a labyrinth of concrete pillars and stagnant pools. Shapes drifted beneath the surface, pale and slow-moving. I kept the flashlight trained ahead, but the beam seemed to die just a few feet out, swallowed by the darkness. Jackson staggered forward, Tanya still draped over his shoulders like a rag doll. "This way," I gasped, though I had no idea where I was going. We sloshed through the flooded tunnels, every splash echoing off the walls like gunshots. Somewhere above us, the whispers grew fainter, but they never stopped. They seemed to seep into the very stone, vibrating up through my boots, making my bones ache with every step. Then, up ahead, a faint green glow appeared, shimmering off the water's surface like a promise. We hurried toward it, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. The source of the light was a wide, arched tunnel opening, its stone lined with strange symbols etched in what looked like rust but glowed faintly as we approached. Beyond the arch, the water fell away, revealing a dry stone floor littered with old crates and rusted metal shelves. I helped Jackson set Tanya down on a relatively dry patch, checking her pulse. It was weak, but there. I let out a shaky breath. The green glow came from dozens of phosphorescent mushrooms sprouting along the walls, their light cold and sickly. But what caught my eye was the crate in the center of the room. The lid was missing, and inside lay more glass skulls, each wrapped in rotting velvet. As I stepped closer, I realized these skulls were different. They had no features, smooth and blank like mannequins, but within each swirled a storm of black mist. I reached out, compelled by something I couldn't name, and touched one. The instant my fingers brushed the glass, I felt my mind pulled inward. Darkness swallowed me, and I stood in a place that felt like a dream or a nightmare. Endless corridors stretched out in every direction, walls made of shifting mirrors reflecting countless versions of myself. And among the mirrors floated glass skulls, each one showing me dying in a new, horrific way, drowning in black water, burning in a hall of skulls, bleeding out on the marble floor of the ballroom. The visions came faster, more frantic, until they blurred together into an endless cascade of my own deaths. I ripped my hand back, falling to my knees in the cold water. My head spun, bile rising in my throat. Jackson grabbed my shoulder, shaking me. "What did you see?" he demanded, eyes wild. I couldn't answer. Words felt useless. But the skull in the crate now glowed faintly red, its mist swirling faster, like it had fed on what I'd seen. I turned toward the far end of the room, where the archway led into even deeper darkness, and I saw a faint silhouette, the veiled woman, standing perfectly still, her outline barely distinguishable in the gloom. She raised one hand slowly, a finger curling in a beckoning motion. Then she vanished into the shadows beyond the arch, as if she'd never been there. Jackson looked at me, eyes wide with terror and understanding. We both knew we had no choice. If we stayed here, the skulls would find us. If we followed her, at least we might learn how to survive. I scooped Tanya back into my arms, and we stepped through the archway into the bowels of the hotel. The air beyond was colder still, our breath freezing instantly in front of us. The tunnels sloped downward, the walls narrowing until we had to walk single file. The green mushrooms thinned out, and soon our only light was the dying beam of my flashlight. As we descended, the whispers grew louder again, echoing up from the darkness ahead. They formed words now, sentences in a voice like cracking ice. The skulls remember. The skulls need. The skulls will grow. The whispers grew deafening, wrapping around us like a cold fog as we squeezed through the narrow stone corridor. Every time I blinked, I saw flashes of pale, glassy faces in the dark, skulls hovering just beyond the edge of my light, their hollow eyes swirling with darkness. The walls pressed in closer, the ceiling lowering until we had to crouch, and the floor slanted steeper with each step. The air stank of old earth and something chemical, like bleach mixed with rotting meat. Our breathing was ragged, echoing harshly against the stone, yet beneath it all, I heard another sound, a rhythmic scratching, like something dragging claws along the walls just out of sight. We emerged into a circular chamber deep beneath the hotel. The ceiling stretched high into darkness, lost beyond the reach of my dying flashlight. In the center of the chamber stood a massive column of black stone, its surface etched with thousands of tiny skull symbols, each barely the size of a coin. Circling the base of the column were more of the blank glass skulls, dozens, maybe hundreds, each pulsing faintly with red light, as if alive. The veiled woman stood before the column, her face obscured, one bony hand resting on the stone as if she could feel the skulls breathing. She turned slowly to face us. "Welcome," she rasped, her voice layered with echoes like 1,000 whispers speaking in unison. "You've come to the heart of the Delacroix, to the place where the glass skulls are born." She stepped aside, revealing a small, ancient fountain built into the base of the column. From it trickled a thin stream of black liquid, thick as tar, which pooled into a basin carved from bone. Floating on the surface were tiny glass beads, miniature skulls forming spontaneously as the liquid cooled. I watched, horrified, as one skull's eye sockets formed, then its jaw, then the delicate, perfect curve of its cranium. The woman dipped her skeletal fingers into the liquid, lifting one of the newborn skulls toward me. "Do you know what they are?" she asked, voice soft as falling snow. "Each skull is a memory of a death, each a seed, a fragment of pain and fear. When they're planted, they grow." She placed the tiny skull into my trembling hand. It was ice cold and pulsed faintly, like a tiny heartbeat. A vision slammed into me. A man in a tuxedo staggering through the ballroom, blood gushing from his throat as laughter echoed around him, his eyes wide with terror as he fell, skull shattering on the marble. The vision ended, leaving me gasping for air. The woman's veil shifted, and though I couldn't see her eyes, I felt them boring into me. "You carry death with you now. The skulls will find you, wherever you go." I staggered backward, nearly dropping Tanya. Jackson grabbed my arm. "We have to get out of here," he hissed. But the veiled woman raised a hand, and the air grew impossibly still. The whispers stopped, replaced by silence so profound it felt like my ears had popped. Then, from the darkness beyond the chamber, shapes emerged. People, or what looked like people. Their bodies were pale and translucent, skin stretched tight over glass bones that gleamed faintly with candlelight. Their faces were familiar, the same features as the skulls upstairs, each one a perfect match. They moved jerkily, as if controlled by strings, eyes locked on us with cold, empty hunger. Jackson screamed, raising the crowbar in desperation. The nearest glass-eyed figure lunged, and the sound of shattering glass exploded in the chamber as he smashed its skull. But more came, dozens of them, spilling into the room from every tunnel. I turned and ran, dragging Tanya as Jackson fought behind me. The veiled woman's laughter chased us, high and shrill, echoing off the stone in a way that made it impossible to tell where she was. We stumbled down a sloping passage that spiraled deeper underground, each turn revealing flashes of ancient murals depicting robed figures raising glass skulls to the sky, rivers of black liquid spilling from their eyes. The walls began to vibrate with a deep, rhythmic pulse, like the heartbeat of some massive creature. The floor cracked beneath our feet, thin fissures snaking out from every step. Water seeped up through the cracks, black and oily, filling the air with a choking stench. My flashlight flickered, threatening to die completely. In its unsteady beam, I glimpsed shapes moving within the walls. Figures frozen inside the stone, hands pressed against the surface, mouths open in silent screams. The fissures widened, and I heard the unmistakable sound of glass grinding on glass behind us. The skulls were following, rolling along the floor like hunting animals, their reflections fracturing the thin light into spiderweb patterns. We burst through a crumbling arch, into a cavern so massive it felt like an underground cathedral. A forest of stone pillars loomed in the darkness, each pillar sprouting more glass skulls that glowed faintly blue, casting ghostly patterns across the ceiling. Water dripped from above, forming thin glass-like stalactites that rang with hollow notes when they fell and shattered on the stone. In the center of the cavern rose a spiraling staircase of black metal, ascending into the darkness above. Jackson grabbed my arm, eyes wild. "It's our only chance." We began to climb, every step sending shudders through the fragile structure. Behind us, the cavern erupted with movement as the glass-eyed figures poured into the space, skulls rolling ahead of them like eager hounds. Halfway up the stairs, the beam of my flashlight swept across something that made my heart seize. High on the cavern wall, embedded like a tumor of glass and bone, was a massive skull the size of a small car. Its eyes glowed bright red, and within those eyes swirled countless tiny reflections of myself, each one dying in a different way. The giant skull's mouth opened slowly, releasing a deep, resonant hum that vibrated the staircase so violently I thought it would collapse. The hum grew louder, drowning out Jackson's shouts, Tanya's ragged breathing, even the sound of my own heartbeat. Every skull in the cavern joined the chorus, creating a deafening, inhuman symphony of death. We reached the top of the staircase, bursting into a narrow tunnel that sloped upward at a steep angle. The air was warmer here, carrying the scent of mold and old wood instead of stone and death. I dared to hope we were near the surface, Behind us, the hum receded slightly, but it never stopped. It felt like it would follow me to the ends of the earth. The tunnel walls were lined with rotting wooden beams, and the ceiling sagged ominously. We climbed over piles of debris, broken chairs, shattered mirrors, rusted bed springs, each step bringing us closer to a faint light ahead. Finally, we stumbled into a small, circular room. It looked like an old storage cellar, stone walls lined with shelves full of empty bottles and dusty crates. A single trap door in the ceiling let in a thin shaft of moonlight. Jackson scrambled up, pushing the trap door open with a grunt. Snow swirled in the opening, and I felt the first gust of fresh, freezing air on my face. He climbed through and reached down to help pull Tanya up, then me. We crawled out into a forest clearing, under a sky choked with swirling snow. Behind us, half buried in drifts, stood the Delacroix Hotel, its walls dark and silent, windows like black eyes staring into the night. For a moment, everything was quiet. The only sound was the wind moaning through the trees. Then, faintly at first, the hum began again, so soft it might have been mistaken for the wind, but growing louder with every heartbeat. I turned to the hotel and saw the skulls in the ballroom windows, glowing with cold red light, their eyes watching us even here. The forest around us seemed to shift subtly, trees leaning inward, shadows moving against the wind. Tanya stirred weakly in Jackson's arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at me, lips parting to speak, but the words that came weren't hers. "The skulls see you," she whispered, voice layered with echoes not her own. "The skulls remember, and now they will follow." The forest closed around us like a living thing. Snow fell harder, fat flakes swirling in chaotic patterns that made the trees seem to shift every time I looked away. The hum of the skulls grew into a low, continuous drone pulsing through the ground, vibrating up through my legs. Jackson stumbled forward, clutching Tanya to his chest, eyes darting between the trees. I followed close behind, my flashlight's dying beam sweeping the darkness. Every time I turned it back toward the hotel, I saw more skulls in the windows, dozens, then hundreds, glowing red like a swarm of eyes. The forest seemed endless. Every path we tried turning us back toward the hotel, I could feel something stalking us in the dark, moving with impossible speed, always just beyond the reach of light. The snow muffled our footsteps, but every now and then, I heard the soft crunch of something else moving, pacing us. We broke into a small clearing surrounded by black pines. Jackson collapsed to his knees, gasping, Tanya's limp form slipping from his arms into the snow. I dropped beside them, trying to steady my breathing. The hum faded, replaced by a heavy silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped. Then a voice drifted on the wind, soft, familiar, but impossibly out of place. It was my mother's voice, calling my name like she used to when I was a child. I stood, turning slowly, scanning the forest. There, between two gnarled trees, I saw her silhouette. She stepped forward, pale and perfect, eyes wide and glassy. I took a step toward her, tears welling in my eyes despite everything. She raised a hand, beckoning. Then her mouth opened wider than humanly possible, splitting her face in half, revealing a glass skull beneath her skin. The hum roared back to life, louder than ever. Jackson screamed, scrambling to his feet as more figures stepped from the shadows. My father, Jackson's brother, Tanya's childhood friend, each wearing familiar faces over glass skulls that cracked and splintered as they smiled. The forest filled with whispers, hundreds of overlapping voices chanting in unison. "The skulls remember. The skulls remember." I grabbed Tanya's wrist and pulled her up, forcing her to run. Jackson was already crashing through the underbrush, desperation lending him speed. The false family members lunged after us, their movements jerky and unnatural, skulls clacking together like a chorus of marbles. We broke through the tree line into another clearing, this one dominated by an ancient stone well. The snow here was stained black, the ground churned as if something massive had crawled through. The well's opening yawned before us, darkness deeper than night spilling out. The humming was deafening now, coming from the well itself, vibrating the air until it felt like the forest would tear apart. Jackson staggered to the edge, peering down. "It's a way out!" he shouted, voice cracking with hysteria. But as I stepped forward, I saw the truth. The well's interior was lined with thousands of tiny glass skulls, each one watching, each one humming. Tanya suddenly convulsed in my grip, her eyes rolling back as black mist poured from her mouth. It formed a swirling column above her head, then snapped downward, slamming her body to the ground with a sickening crack. She lay still, eyes open but empty, glassy and cold. Jackson let out a strangled sob. The mist coalesced into a skull shape, hovering over the well, features shifting between our faces. It pulsed with red light, the hum rising in pitch until it became a shriek. The ground split open beneath our feet, fissures racing out like lightning, swallowing trees whole. I grabbed Jackson, dragging him back just as the well collapsed into a massive sinkhole. We tumbled down the snowy slope, landing hard on ice at the bottom. The world around us cracked and shattered like a mirror, the forest above splitting into jagged shards that reflected impossible scenes, the ballroom filled with skulls, the veiled woman standing among mountains of glass, a train packed with frozen passengers screaming soundlessly. Each reflection felt like a window into another nightmare. The shards floated in the air, slowly orbiting the sinkhole, their edges dripping black mist that hissed when it touched the ground. Through the shifting reflections, I saw the veiled woman again. She stood on a fragment of forest suspended above us, veil fluttering in an unseen wind. She raised both hands, and the skulls in every shard began to glow brighter, their humming synchronizing into a single resonant tone that rattled my bones. "You've seen it now," her voice boomed, echoing from every direction. "The world behind the glass, the truth of death's reflection. There is no escape, only inheritance." The shards began to close in, edges slicing through the air like scythes. Jackson pushed me aside just as one shard slammed into him, cleaving through his body with a sound like breaking ice. His eyes met mine for a split second, wide, terrified. Then his body split apart, dissolving into a cloud of black mist that spiraled upward into a new glass skull forming above the sinkhole. I staggered backward, slipping on the ice, crawling away as the shards descended. Each one that touched the ground erupted in a geyser of skulls that rolled across the ice toward me, eyes flashing red. I ran, feet slipping, hands clawing at the ground. A shard crashed beside me, sending up a spray of glass that sliced my cheek. The skulls swarmed around me, clacking together, whispering in dozens of voices I recognized. My friends, my family, strangers I'd passed in the hotel halls. Their words overlapped into a single message: "Join us. Remember with us." I reached the far edge of the sinkhole, finding a narrow tunnel leading into darkness. Without hesitation, I threw myself into it, the world behind me exploding in a roar of shattering glass. I tumbled through the tunnel, sliding down a steep slope that twisted and turned, each curve illuminated by flashes of red light from the skulls chasing me. The air grew warmer, the walls changing from icy stone to rotting wood. My slide ended with a painful crash as I landed in a narrow corridor lined with cracked wallpaper and sagging sconces. Back inside the hotel, though it felt deeper, older, I forced myself up, breath ragged, legs shaking. Ahead, a faint light flickered, casting long shadows that danced like grasping hands. I stumbled toward it, each step accompanied by the soft hum of the skulls closing in behind me. The corridor opened into a small, circular room lined with mirrors. The glass was warped, each pane reflecting a different version of myself. Older, younger, bloodied, terrified. In every reflection, a glass skull floated above my shoulder, whispering in my ear. At the center of the room sat the piano from the ballroom. Keys cracked, its surface covered in fresh blood. The journal lay open on the keys, pages fluttering as if blown by an unseen breeze. I approached slowly, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. My hand reached for the journal, fingers brushing the cover. A voice spoke from behind me, cold, calm, inhumanly patient. "It's time to remember." I turned slowly, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst. The veiled woman stood just inside the doorway, her silhouette framed by the flickering candlelight. Her veil rippled with every breath I took, though the air itself was utterly still. She stepped forward, her feet making no sound on the warped floorboards, gliding more than walking. Around her, shadows thickened, coiling like snakes across the mirrors. Each reflection twisted, showing her from 100 angles, but none revealing what lay beneath the veil. She raised one skeletal hand and pointed at the piano. "Play," she rasped, the single word echoing like a gunshot. I backed away, shaking my head, but the room groaned around me, the walls flexing inward as if the hotel itself were breathing. The mirrors darkened, each surface rippling with images of the deaths I'd witnessed. Jackson's face frozen in terror, Tanya's lifeless eyes, the glass skulls rolling across the ballroom. The veiled woman's hand closed into a fist. The piano keys depressed themselves, one by one, striking discordant notes that resonated through the floor, up my legs, vibrating my teeth. Each note triggered a new vision in the mirrors, people I'd never met screaming in dark places, skulls shattering in slow motion, blood running like rivers across marble floors. I fell to my knees, hands clutching my ears, but the music continued, faster now, the notes slamming into me like hammer blows. I felt memories tearing loose, not just my own but those of strangers, their last moments flooding through me in a torrent of agony and terror. The mirrors shattered all at once, shards hanging in the air, each reflecting a different nightmare. The veiled woman's voice rose above the cacophony, layered and inhuman. The skulls are the keys. They open the door to memory, to truth, to eternity. The ceiling cracked open, revealing the night sky. But instead of stars, thousands of glass skulls floated above the hotel, arranged in a spiral that stretched into infinity. Each skull's eyes glowed with pale fire, swirling with storm clouds of black mist. Lightning arced between them, illuminating the forest far below. The hotel trembled, floors shifting beneath me like tectonic plates. The piano's notes became a frenzied dirge, a melody of madness that burrowed into my skull. Through it all, the veiled woman stepped forward until she loomed over me. She lifted her veil slowly, and for the first time I saw her face, a flawless glass skull, empty eye sockets swirling with reflections of every person who'd ever died inside the Delacroix. Her mouth opened, and the music stopped dead. Silence fell like a guillotine. Then, softly, she whispered, "Remember." The hotel exploded around me, not with fire or force, but with memory. Walls fell away, revealing dozens of places all at once. The ballroom at the moment of the 1979 massacre, a burning train packed with screaming passengers, a shipwrecked vessel groaning under monstrous waves, a suburban house splattered with blood. All these places layered atop one another, bleeding together into an impossible tapestry of horror. And in every scene, the glass skulls were present, watching silently. I staggered through this fractured world, moving from one nightmare to the next. A girl with blonde hair sat sobbing in a bedroom lit by flickering candles. A veiled old woman sold a skull to a man who'd never wake up from his dreams. A train conductor walked through a car filled with corpses still screaming in their seats. I realized with growing horror that all these events were connected, threads in a vast web of death and memory, each one leading back to the skulls. The Blacklight journal universe unfolded before me, endless and hungry. I tripped over a skull rolling at my feet, falling onto cold marble that cracked beneath me. Blood seeped up through the fissures, running in rivers toward a central point. The piano still standing in every scene at once. I crawled toward it, driven by something deeper than fear. My hand closed on the journal resting on its keys, the leather now slick with blood. Pages flipped themselves, landing on a passage written in fresh ink. The skulls do not kill, they remember. But what they remember, they make real. A roar rose around me, a hurricane of screams. The skulls overhead descended in a swirling maelstrom, each one trailing tendrils of mist. They smashed into the ground one by one, erupting in showers of glass that reformed instantly into more skulls. The spiral of death closed around me, tighter and tighter, until I could see my own reflection in every glass surface. My face contorted in terror, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. Then, in every reflection, I watched myself die. over and over. A hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around, expecting another horror, but it was Jackson. His face was whole, alive, but glassy and hollow-eyed. He reached for my hand, pulling me to my feet. His mouth moved, but instead of his voice, the veiled woman's came out. "You can join them, or you can carry them." He pressed something cold and heavy into my palm, a glass skull, identical to the others, but swirling inside it was my own reflection, flickering between life and death. The world slowed, the skulls freezing mid-air, the roar fading into a low, pulsing heartbeat. The veiled woman appeared beside Jackson, one hand on his shoulder. She raised her other hand toward me, palm open. "Choose," she said softly, almost kindly. "Become a memory, or become the bearer of memory." My hand trembled around the skull, the swirling mist inside speeding up until it became a storm. I realized what she meant. If I took on the skull's burden, I would survive, but I would carry the deaths of everyone it had ever remembered, every nightmare, every scream. The skull pulsed once, twice, then grew warm in my hand. I closed my fingers around it. The hotel snapped back into place. I stood alone in the ballroom, the piano silent, the candles burning low. The skulls were gone, the hum silenced. Snow fell gently outside the shattered windows, moonlight painting the marble floor. I staggered to the doors, now standing open, the forest beyond, quiet and still. Dawn was breaking, pale light creeping over the horizon. I stepped outside, each footfall echoing in the empty halls behind me. I felt the weight of the skull in my pocket, its faint warmth pulsing with every heartbeat. I could hear whispers at the edge of hearing. The dead, the remembered, forever with me. As I reached the edge of the forest, I turned back one last time. The Delacroix stood silent, dark, but in the highest window of the ballroom, a single skull glowed faint red. Watching, waiting. I stepped into the snow, the whispers growing fainter but never silent. The world outside felt brighter, cleaner, almost normal, but I knew I would never be free. I was the skull bearer now, the living archive of every death the glass had ever recorded. The Blacklight journal's stories had become mine. And as I looked at the rising sun, I realized the skulls had not only remembered death, they had chosen me to carry it forward. Behind me, the forest seemed to sigh, branches shivering in a wind that didn't touch the ground. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, the veiled woman's voice drifted through the cold morning air. "Remember."